All right, so now we've got everybody's attention here, and Zoe, I'd like to ask you to come up and talk to us about inclusive bio-based innovations.
Thank you, Sandra. I'm very, very pleased to be here, and I'm also very thankful to Kelly and Sandra for inviting me. It might sound a little bit crazy that I came all the way to the Netherlands for this, but it's not that crazy because the topic of inclusive innovation is a topic that's very scattered in the academic research. And in practice, we see it everywhere. So what the center here is doing, ISSP, is very commendable because they're building a program that's going to try to bring all these things together, and I'm incredibly happy to be able to be part of this in a small way. I'm also very happy to be here because I did my undergrad at the University of Ottawa many years ago, and I learned this morning already so much about Indigenous innovation, which is not my expertise, and I'm very thankful to all the speakers for sharing their stories. So today what I'm going to tell you about is a research project called Inclusive Bio-Based Innovations. And that's a project that was funded by the Dutch Research Organization under their Responsible Innovation Grant Framework. And this is work I've done with Dr. Lotte Asveld at the University of Delft and a master's student who's a chemical engineer, Sarah Franke, who now works as a process engineer. And this, before I get into a specific case that we worked on, I'm going to tell you about two of the keywords in the title of this presentation. The first one is the bioeconomy. So what are bio-based innovations? So that's a range of technological ideas that look at using biomass, so products of agriculture or leftover cooking oil, so anything that's kind of an organic base, to do things we're already doing better, so using what we already do better, or to do things we haven't done before, like building biomaterials, or producing important chemical components, not from chemical reactions, but from biological processes. And for this, we use biotechnology. So we use modified bacteria that can do things for us, that can transform them. And in that field, in the Netherlands, and also in Canada, there is a lot of research being done for how can we do all these things better, using things that grow from the earth, that are renewable, so we can do things in a cleaner way for the environment. So that's the idea behind the bioeconomy. And in this project, we worked with industrial partners who had ideas for how we can do these things, what new kind of technologies we could use in different places in the world. So we kind of looked at what they wanted to do, and working with them, we tried to think, okay, if you want to do that, what does it mean to do it in a way that is inclusive? Which brings me to the other keyword, which is also the theme of today, inclusion. So if you look around, and also if you look at the word cloud this morning, inclusion has very different aspects. In my field of responsible innovation, inclusion is a pillar. So it's something very important that helps us do things responsibly. In design, it's also a principle for accessibility. So here you see a water fountain that can be used by people in a wheelchair, by a child, or by an adult who is fully able to walk. But it's also embodied in policies. In history, in recent history, we see how policies have helped farmers acquire equipment, get more education in order to become more autonomous in their participation on the market. And when I talk about farmers, in that case, it was a historical review of African American farmers in the US. So inclusion is everywhere and takes different shapes. That doesn't mean that we don't know what it means. And what I want to look at you today is one way to understand what it means from a very practical way of an ethicist like me working with a group of engineers. So one of our project partners wanted to go to Jamaica. because Jamaica is a wonderful island with great climate where things grow all the time. So if you can imagine that you want to use concepts of the bioeconomy technologies to transform biomass, Jamaica is a good place because they grow all the time. The Netherlands is a bit more challenging because it's a small country and it's not as lush as Jamaica. So these are Dutch developers with an idea. And we said, okay, let's go see what's there, what you want to do. And when we went there, so this was our team, and Sarah Franke, who's a chemical engineer, process engineer, she was in charge for understanding what does the context mean with the kind of innovations they have in mind. And when we went there, we learned a lot. So we didn't go there to tell anything about our partners' projects. We just went there to learn about what were people doing, how they were doing it, and what were their challenges. One of their challenges was that historically there's been a preferential price agreement with the UK, which has left the Jamaican sugar industry much less competitive than other countries in the Caribbean or in Latin America. And so when we visited, we saw that they're working really hard, but with equipment that's from 1950 to 1970. And so on the global market, they're not very competitive. So that's also an opportunity for saying, well, new technologies could help you do new things. But is it really like that? And if it is, how does it work? So I really liked what Elder Rachel Prudhomme said at the beginning of today. And she said, connection leads to inclusion. And this table looks very technical, but it tries to embody this idea of connection. So using a framework from the literature that is called the technology innovation system, we see that you can describe a system through different functions. So you have the knowledge function, you have the entrepreneurial experimentation function, you have the how people decide what they want to do, so influence on direction of search, you have the market formation function, you have the resource mobilization, and you have legitimation. And describing all of these things in a system helps you understand, helps you connect with the reality of the system you want to do something in as an engineer, not coming from that system. And using this, what we did, well, it's mostly our student did, was to define design constraints for context sensitivity. So you have a sugar factory, you have an idea coming from abroad, which is a very high-tech idea, and then you have the context in which this idea should happen. And what we saw is that, okay, when you make a technological choice, you need to know for whom you're making that choice. And when you do that choice, then you have to understand how it builds on what's already there. So how it builds on those functions that you've recognized when you went into the field, when you talked to people, when you've observed and learned about their reality. And doing this analysis, the first design constraint she came up with was, well, these new processes, they don't want to work with sugarcane because you harvest sugarcane once a year. And they want a crop that you will harvest 6 times a year so that they have a more continuous process. But you're in a context where being a sugarcane farmer is part of their identity, is part of a skill set of a set of skills and knowledge that people have. So the first design constraint you should have if you want to build something in the bioeconomy is to stick with sugarcane. The second design constraint she defined from understanding is that, okay, at the moment, this sugar factory, they produce brown sugar, but maybe with small incremental improvement, they could produce white sugar, so refined sugar. And another thing they could do is use this to produce ethanol that they could use for their own energy. And I want to, in the interest of time, I want to jump to the last design requirement, which is the fifth one. And it was to say enough is enough. So technologically, we can accomplish a lot, but maybe it's not always the best context to jump to that stage, because you might leave people behind, because these choices might be for the interest of a process that's super efficient, but not necessarily in the interest of the people there. So with this idea of inclusion, you get to a much more simple design, but that's context sensitive. And that adds something to people's lives that helps them learn some skills. Instead of, and this is not the process that our partners wanted to do, it's just an example I took from the literature, but it kind of looked like that. And when you have a drawing like that, it also means a biorefinery that is very big and that we don't even have in Europe at the moment. So what I want to leave you with today is the idea that inclusion is something that we do in policies, that we do in design, that we can do in technology choices, looking at how a technology fits in a system. And that, first and foremost, inclusion is about making choice for people. So when you innovate for people. So when you look at a problem, you think about people first. And that means supporting the development of their capabilities. So if you're a bit familiar with the literature on capabilities, that's something that Sen and Nussbaum worked on, and it's about what we need to live a good life. It's also helping people upholding their values. And in their values is also their identity. So if I identify as a sugarcane farmer, what would it mean if suddenly a company tells me, well, now I want you to plant something else? How does this fit in their values? And linked to that, how does it fit with their existing knowledge? Because you want to be able to have innovations that help cultivating local knowledge, that help building on these. Thank you.
It's a bit slow here. All right, thank you so much. And it's kind of fascinating how, you know, the social and technological pieces kind of come together, right? But you actually kind of have done it, and it actually has worked. So what we're doing right now is we're trying. So thank you very much for this. We had Venus a moment ago.